Welcome everyone to our study of training in tenderness, and the subtitle being Buddhist teachings on Dzigar, the radical openness of a heart that can change the world. In fact, this particular session will actually be proposing some very radical perspectives in terms of how we approach the notion of death, and also how we, and this is particularly the last one, you could almost say it's like not quite a political manifesto, but it's very much an injunction or an encouragement to take on a kind of view that is very rarely voiced. And when it's voiced, it's very often seen as being impossible. Sorry. Actually, somebody told me I should mute when I do that. So, sorry if your ears are taking a bit of a pounding. And something I remember Matthew Ricard, or rather Matthew Ricard's father, Jean-François Revel, he talked about how in the West, we've sort of, when we talk philosophy, we very often take on this sort of totalitarian attitude that if what we're saying has any value, it has to be adopted for everybody. And that's actually something he said wasn't really part of philosophy before. In Buddhism, we say, yes, it would be great if these ideas were taken on by everybody. We're not really expecting it. But what has happened in the West very often is that we take on these, whatever we say, it has to be sort of valid for everybody. And he said this it's very much something we have from Marxism, where we sort of want to apply one standard for everybody. It just doesn't work. Of course, Marx was talking about political or societal change. Here we're talking about something that applies to the heart, but it is something that is controversial, and it's very powerful statements that will not necessarily ring true for everybody in the given moment that we might propose them, let's say in a discussion, in political discussion and so forth. It is this discussion of what about the world? And this comes up all the time. And that's where what we're talking about here is more something that we can apply for ourselves, but it stands so, you can say, radically opposed to how very often we see things in terms of the need for, it's perceived as standing in opposition to political change. What we're talking about here is something, nothing to do with what we do, which of course doesn't prevent that we could be politically active. It's more to do with what we're doing with the heart. And that, at the end of the day, is really what lies at the bottom of what creates our reality. And whereas in the modern context, we very often think, well, heart, who knows, but it's more about the outer world changing that. And so we from a Buddhist point of view, we have a very different perspective on the nature of the world. And this is reflected in here, but I think also everybody who listens the argument through will actually agree that this is the only way forward. Okay, this is really just to sort of whet your appetite for hearing what actually comes, but it's something also I think is really an essential part of the message here, and particularly an essential part of how we apply this when we effectively take these teachings into, you could say, our consideration and also our practice. So these are two big issues. You could say the first is very much operates on a personal level, and the second more on a global scale. The first is how we, aging persons that we are, and regardless of who we are, we, like Tongtse Rinpoche says, living is dying. We're born to die. So this is basic to any situation. So chapter 9, meeting death with an open heart. So in life, losses, desirable and undesirable, happen to us continually. Like Rinpoche says, we very often choose to lose things. We might choose to lose some of our hair. We get a haircut. Or we might get rid of our garbage. We might get rid of various things. So we continually operate with losses that are desirable. And then also we lose things that are undesirable. But in general, we accept impermanence, and we're actually surprisingly benign and genteel about impermanence, because we just seem to be okay with the fact that the days go by, the years go by. One of my teachers, Tugopeng Wangyal, he once described how after really pondering impermanence, he was actually terrified of just seeing how the shadows would grow longer as the day would end. And this is not because he was traumatized in any way, but it was just, it gave him this sense of we mustn't waste a moment. So we don't really operate with the notion of how to kill time. So as far as the greatest loss that can ever take place, which is death, we have that continually. We struggle with the loss of dear ones. And of course, also we have these losses that happen in terms of possibly financial ruin, a diagnosis we might have, a serious health diagnosis. And greatest of all is then the loss of our life. And this is inevitable. This is the most devastating experience we will have in the course of our entire existence. This is something that, of course, in modern society we gloss over it, and we find all sorts of nice little things. You know, we say, "Oh yes, he has found peace. She has gone to a better world," and so on. We'd like to sort of think that, and that really just shows how we lack any science around what this is. We don't know where people go, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's not as if we need to necessarily paint a grim picture of death, but we need to understand that it is actually something that's for real, and in terms of what comes next, also it's for real. Of course, the Buddhist perspective never ever assumes that consciousness is something that could ever emerge from what doesn't have consciousness, for example, a brain or biological systems and so forth. That would be seen as quite a leap of faith. The Buddhists say that whatever we experience comes from our consciousness, and that includes also our embodiment and also the phenomenal world. So there's no sense that clinical death means that our consciousness will cease. So there's a very real perspective in terms of us actually preparing ourselves beyond just this single moment of this particular life. But what for sure is that when we face death, then this will be a terrifying experience. We all think of how terrible it is when a murder takes place or somebody loses their life, or just death happens. Well, the thing is, we're all going to experience that. So as we die, we're going to experience discomfort when we're no longer sort of functioning properly physically. We're going to experience severe pain possibly. And what also on a psychological level, then we will have great fear, letting go of what's familiar, being alone, going to what's unknown. We will have all sorts of grief and angst, and also our attachment to this world will all of a sudden be far more pronounced. But, and this is the important part, the bottom line is we can overcome these circumstances. And Rinpoche here, he then describes how he has seen in numerous instances persons who handle death in a positive way. He says, I have been with many people at the end of their lives. It is a difficult time for almost everyone, but I have seen some people do very well. They have shown great resilience and suffered little from fear, anxiety, depression, regret, and grief. Often they have gone through physical discomfort, but even that is lessened. They have deeply appreciated their life's journey, all the events in it, the ups and downs, and all the people they have known and encountered. Some have even met death in a state of complete joy and fearlessness. So of course you might say, well, Rinpoche grew up in a Tibetan community where many persons had a deep experience and realization of yoga, of meditation, had a confidence of realization. That of course is possible. That applies not just to great lamas, but also to ordinary Buddhist lay people. But I think he also means here in the West, And I personally have experienced that persons who didn't necessarily know how to practice or had any particular spiritual qualifications, that actually just with their kindness, right up to, obviously being concerned about where death went, but also surprisingly easygoing towards the very last steps of their journey. So this is something that really applies universally. But it is something also that goes beyond just being necessarily some highly realized spiritual practitioner. And describing these kind of people, then Rinpoche says, in dealing with end of life, the secret lies not in particular skills or beliefs. Like we might have particular sort of yogic abilities, or we might have particular faith that leaves us without too much worry. It might also not mean Rinpoche describes we could, for example, have a glorious last period where maybe we're grateful for all the help we get, or maybe we have extraordinary technologies helping us and so forth. We might also be surrounded by a lot of people who are concerned for us and so forth, which of course you could say stimulates the ordinary sense of just being cared for. But that's not so much what Rinpoche is onto. He says rather two factors define such psychological and emotional well-being. This is important because this is the theme that he repeats, which is one, a tender heart, flowing with sewa, flowing abundantly to others. Did I repeat that? I'm not sure. Anyway, yes, that's probably me repeating it. That's not quoting Rinpoche. So anyway, a tender heart flowing abundantly, a tender heart with sewa, flowing abundantly to others. And sewa, again, this Tibetan term meaning tenderness, this quality of going beyond just our ordinary self-centered agenda and really expanding into not just, you could say, a sort of ordinary dualistic caring for others, but actually even beyond that, even into a dimension of greatness, which is why we could equate this sewa with what we sometimes call bodhicitta. So to have this kind of tender heart and just a positive attitude, a non-defeatist attitude, an attitude where we can, despite whatever is going on, there's that sort of resilience. So like Rinpoche says, people possess resilience and they are an inspiration. So Rinpoche says specifically, then quoting him, it says, when the heart is completely open, there is no longer any room for small, short-sighted attachment to the self. Our tendency to self-inflict pain by cherishing and protecting the ego is nowhere left to hang out. When our heart is full of warm feelings toward others, we're connected to the source of all goodness in the world. We are in touch with the only reliable source of happiness and peace. So when we say the ego has nowhere left to hang out, there's actually at that time, there's not really anything. I mean, people might bring us, things that we like. They might do, all of a sudden they're busy, doing everything that we like. And yet that's not really going to cut it. And so there's not really anything, people might buy you new clothes, so they might buy you little gifts or flowers, and you can fill up the room with flowers. It's going to do very little. Of course, it will be appreciated by the person dying, and very often the dying person is very gracious in, you could say, appreciating the discomfort that those who are attending to this person are actually trying to patch up with bringing little things, what in fact is rather meaningless trinkets and gestures. But very often people are gracious around that. But the thing is, there's nothing really that gives us any kind of pleasure at that point. So that's where there's only one thing that's going to really matter, and that is this heart of tenderness that we were just talking about. That's the only reliable source of happiness and peace. So basically, we are saying here, sewa is the greatest refuge in face of the sufferings of old age, sickness, and death. So in the Buddhist teaching, we talk about the 4 great rivers of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And here we're talking about then these last 3. Now, this is about sewa. But then Rinpoche was saying positive thinking. That's the other quality that provides strength and resilience at the time of death. And what we're talking about here is not the sort of just, you know, keep on smiling attitude. Positive thinking is not sort of a naively or superficially positive in the sense of, you know, just be upbeat and everything will be fine. It comes from real substance. Rinpoche says to go along with a tender heart, we also need to have a habit of positive thinking. This does not mean being naively or superficially positive. It does not mean engaging in wishful thinking or propping ourselves up with affirmations that we don't believe. Genuine positive thinking means making the best of whatever happens in our lives. So this is being positive with whatever is real. It doesn't mean that we like to think, oh yeah, well, you know, when I die here, I'm probably going to go to something greater. And this is, again, these kind of cliches that very often in this, particularly in the materialist culture where we have no clue on what consciousness really is and what happens when we die, we would just like to sort of hang on to these sort of absolutely meaningless phrases such as, you know, going to a better place and so forth. You know, let's hope, you know, old Carl, he's, you know, found peace wherever he went. But I mean, Carl will go exactly where the actions that propel Carl are going to take him or her. You know, so there's not really any kind of mystery happening. And so positive thinking means that we're content with right now with what we have. And this is actually remarkable when we see this. And of course, this is also what is something that has to be trained beforehand. This means we already, regardless of what we have and whatever goes down, that we have this ability to just be okay with it. It doesn't mean that we have to make unrealistic assertions about things like, well, let's hope it gets better, or, you know, I'm sure there's a meaning with this. It's really just practically relating straightforwardly in a resilient way with whatever comes up. When we have that, so that kind of outlook makes us resourceful. It means that we can rely on ourselves. And that's where we're not relying on directions or rules or prescriptions. We can think out of the box. And this is also where we acknowledge how suffering, it enables us to be more empathetic. We sympathize more with others. And also it's something that with our pain, that we then realize the need for something that gets us out of here. And that's where the path of liberation is really the only option. And we strengthen our bodhicitta resolve on the basis of these various conditions of suffering. So both for in terms of being aware of the suffering of others, and also in terms of giving ourselves direction, we can turn suffering into something that is conducive, is something positive. So with this kind of positive outlook, we can also see any suffering, even death, as a blessing. We're aware of the fact that we will die, and this doesn't defeat us. This doesn't bring us down. We see this as something that spurs us on in terms of working with our condition. And that not just death, but any suffering that we come across, we can actually even mimic saying thank you. And we have all the lojong, or the mind training, that actually very practically instructs us. There's never ever going to be a moment where somebody just waves a magic wand and from then on we say, from then on, all of a sudden I began to see all suffering as a blessing. That's not going to happen. But we have some instructions that we, working with ourselves, humbly recognizing our own limitations, our inability to apply that we then, inch by inch, can begin to shift our disposition and our attitudes. So, of course, again, coming back to the perspective that, again, is also not commonly known in the materialist sort of perspective, and that is that death is not only a loss of our precious life, it's more than that. It's like anything. It's like when we move. I remember as a kid having to move from one place to the other. My dad was in the army. I had to give up my friends and so forth. And then I would find friends in a new place. So it's not necessarily that this condition is all about just losing something, because of course it is, and it is painful, but it is also something that brings us into a new place. This is important because without that kind of understanding, then we fall into nihilism. Then we just fixate on what isn't, and that's where we have this rather bleak perspective that it's all loss. If we can see this perspective of death as being a door into something further, then we can begin to prepare what comes next. And this doesn't mean not living in the moment. And of course, that is the beauty, you could say, of the whole path, is that we're not living for what comes next. We're living in the present moment, but we're realizing also that this present moment is continually shifting. So beginning to familiarize ourselves with the sanity that exists in the present moment, we then are prepared then for sustaining that sanity also into what comes next in terms of next life. So that's why there's no conflict in terms of thinking in terms of this moment and also thinking what comes in terms of the future or next life. So for a bodhisattva, there's also the perspective that next life is an opportunity to develop Dzigar further. So the bodhisattva will be thinking, I can benefit more persons in the next life. May I continue to make this bodhicitta develop. Rinpoche says, from the Buddhist teachings point of view, in past lives, we have all been each other's parents and children, sisters and brothers, and lovers and friends. We have all met many times in the past and will continue to meet in the future until we are free from the suffering of samsara. Death is not a final parting. So unless we seem to unless we believe in this seemingly extraordinary perspective that consciousness just pops out of nowhere, then consciousness continuing, consciousness having been the basis for countless of our embodiments, so many persons, so many sisters and brothers, etc. So there's no notion of us parting or leaving anywhere. It's like if we have a big network of friends. There, we just know a lot of people, and it turns out they know a lot of people, and we continually have, you say, connections everywhere. So in that sense, death is not really a final parting. Let's just be clear also, the Buddhists, they don't really see rebirth as just like, oh, that's wonderful, it's not all over. They see it as rather a challenging situation because we don't actually know where we're going. It's like, traveling without your credit card, good luck. So we need to have the necessary papers in place, the visas, credit card, the whatever, we need to have some stops in place for where we're heading. So of course, if we look at the great sages, and Rinpoche, he talks about someone like Rinpoche, who was a great sage in the 19th century, who was completely carefree about death. Actually, as I'm speaking, I'm sort of rummaging my brain for what was it exactly with Rinpoche. But I think Rinpoche just says that he was carefree. I don't think he qualifies it with any example. Anyway, please, this is another incentive to you must read the book. Please don't count on me giving you the digest of what this book contains. You're just getting my my sort of limited perspective on this work. Anyway, we see this in the case of Rinpoche. We have there are some great stories actually. I remember I met this Lama called Lama Kunga, and he was also a teacher of Sonsik Rinpoche. And Lama Kunga was completely without owning anything, one of these completely invisible people, just very impressive if you met him, but just without making a big noise. And I remember Dingpo Chensa Rinpoche once expressing how Lama Kunga was really a great meditator, and he was also a student of this great master called Khenpo Gangsha Wangpo, who is also a teacher of Chögyam Trungpa. Anyway, when Lama Kunga died, it was in Gangtok, and I think he was up near where Khyentse Chogyalodro passed away. I think he was up in, for some reason I remember this is taking place up at we call the Palace Monastery. But anyway, he was out walking with a couple of attendants, and all of a sudden he sat down on the ground and he says, "Okay, this is it. I'm dying now." And the two monks there, they were they were rather concerned. And should we get a doctor? Should we, what should we do, and so on? And he says, and the story goes, Lama Kunga just told them to just chill out. And he said, "Look, I've been practicing meditation all my life. If I am not ready, if I wouldn't be ready for this moment now, it would be a complete waste. But I feel confident. Don't worry." And that's it. And then he passed on, just sitting full lotus on the ground. He passed on just like that. So so there are many stories about individuals like that. There's also Tugurjen's teacher, who was also his uncle, Samten Gyatso. And Tugurjen was giving him the sort of the what we call pointing out instruction, or actually sealing. We call it Gedaba, sealing the experience, basically reiterating or repeating the instructions for somebody who's going through all the sort of the distractions and the intense experiences as you're dying. And Tugurjen then this was after the breath had stopped, and you could say there was after clinical death and so on. And he kept sort of repeating the instructions. And despite actually not having breathed for quite some time, Samten Gyatso opens his eyes, looked at Tugurjen and says, "That's okay, I got it." So this is all just to say that we might not be in that league, but also we shouldn't ever limit ourselves in terms of thinking what we could or couldn't do. And I am very confident that not just Tibetans, but also other persons who pick up and practice the Buddhist teachings will be able to have remarkable deaths like that. In fact, just one of my Dharma brothers who passed away some years ago, Jakob, a Frenchman, very good practitioner, but also remarkable signs after he passed away. Anyway, as a human, and this is where we actually it's interesting, Kongtrul uses, this is the benefit of us being a human with a brain, meaning we can think, we can plan ahead, we can make choices. This is rather special for certainly what we call the higher realms. Not all beings that have that capacity to think constructively about making choices for the future. So that's where presently we are in a place where we can choose to cultivate two attitudes with regards to death. And basically we have a choice. Rinpoche says at the time of death, there are two main scenarios to consider. Either you die with a warm heart and a positive attitude, or you die with a cold heart and a negative attitude. This choice is up to you, but you have to make the choice as soon as possible. If you wait until you're on your deathbed to open your heart and become a positive thinker, you will discover that it's too late. We can't trade our bad habits for good habits at the drop of a hat. It takes a long time to get over bad habits and adopt good ones. And this, incidentally, is also something you will find in all the instructions we have on the death, that instructions about what to do when we die and how to prepare for death is for the living. And it's necessary that we do it now. We don't, first of all, we don't know when we will die, but it's also when that moment happens, there'll be a lot of other considerations, and there'll be a lot of fear and physical discomfort, etc. However, the point here really is that we can choose which way we're going to go. So if we choose that we're going to die with a warm heart and positive attitude, we need to start making the choices now. We can't just say, well, I'm so overwhelmed with everything that's happening right now that I can't really think of that. Because at the moment that we die, all these things that are occupying our mind right now, they will be completely inconsequential and they won't really matter. Whereas it will matter if we do have a warm heart and a positive attitude. So that's where we need to make some priorities, be clear on what we can and can't do, take our limitations into consideration, and then be proactive in terms of creating the best possible circumstances. So this attitude will help us not only at the time of death, but during our entire life. And it also goes without saying, having a warm heart and positive attitude, in the process of training that, it will be something that we can apply. It will benefit us in this in the immediate circumstances. And Rinpoche then also speaks about how a certain spunky attitude can be seen in persons with limited time. Again, talking about persons who have this quality. And again, this is not about Buddhist people necessarily. This could just be about people who have the wisdom to cultivate, sustain a resilience throughout their life. And this we can see, and very often many of us have encountered such people, and they are admirable. So again, this comes down to two qualities. One is tsewa, and one is positivity. Rinpoche says, sometimes we see elderly people who, despite the limited time they have left, are incredibly fearless and passionate about their lives. Their spunky qualities their spunky quality is so inspiring to me. What accounts for this spunkiness? These people are often very ordinary and not necessarily practitioners of any established religion. But what they have is the exuberance of a warm heart and the radiance of positive thinking. They have discovered the formula both for living life with the maximum enjoyment and meaning, and for departing from life with the maximum peace and confidence. This is my greatest wish for us all. So again, this is where we need to recognize that this is not about these people being, you could say, genetically or environmentally predisposed. We might think, oh yeah, well, these people had blah, blah, blah circumstances. I have these blah, blah circumstances. Regardless of what circumstances we have, it is necessary that we have a can-do attitude that is not stuck on any kind of negative perception in terms of what we possess, or a particularly positive, perception of what these people might have or might not have, but rather it's about where we are right now, making these present circumstances the foundation for making the right choice in terms of where we're heading. And this is where the Buddhist teaching has expertise. This is where it's not going to help searching for some sort of comfort or some sort of external help. Somebody will do it for us or something like that. It's necessary that we do it ourselves, but what we are fortunate is that we have presently all the conditions for cultivating the circumstances with which we can meet death with a positive attitude and with the cultivation of a warm heart. So it's on the basis of this then that Rinpoche is saying that what he's saying. Let's see if there's any questions. Hard to watch someone resist death and be consumed by a negative attitude about dying. Gives perspective why we study and why I should stop being so complacent about practice. Exactly. Exactly, yes. That is so true. And that's also why sometimes in our society we have, unfortunately, this culture of sort of hiding death away. And in other cultures it's a bit more visible. And very often you have, people living together. So you very often have, everybody being part of the whole process of what it means getting old and dying and so forth. But yes, it is exactly like that. It's something, there's nothing more that actually motivates us for practice than seeing what life brings us. Yeah. So true, so true. By the way, with regards to coming from the point of view of the presenter here, So much of this, and you'll notice I have just a lot of quotes, and I think even in the next one even more, just quoting straight from the book. So much of this of course is self-explanatory, but I'd also like to highlight really Dzigar Kongtrul's extraordinary capacity for articulating these really difficult insights in contemporary language, of course, drawing on nothing but the timeless and ancient body of knowledge that we have in Buddhism, but doing it so elegantly. Of course, this has a lot to do with the editor also. But then again, you would say the sort of the auspicious conditions of coming together of editor and Rinpoche has a lot to do, I would say, with Rinpoche's bodhicitta and his resolve and his aspirations to reach many people. But of course, this tendril also we should definitely, how do you say, tip the hat in direction of the editor as well. But the bottom line, really, these are Rinpoche's insights, and so much of this just is so beautiful. So I'm really just on, like I'm doing here, you know, just a few points, but the rest is really just quoting Rinpoche himself. So just very, very clear. The world in the future, and this is what I was talking about to begin with, this sort of lands fair and square in this camp of where we very often find ourselves in ordinary conversation with friends and so on, about the future, the world, and all these kind of things that we gravitate towards. And of course, because so much of our culture is driven by media, then it's very often how we see the world. We don't actually, very often we're not even relating fully to our immediate experience, but very much we're relating to what in other cultures is seen as rather exterior. And of course, you could say the fact that we are as connected as we are and know so much about each other, this is an opportunity for us to cultivate this sewa and tenderness beyond just the immediate scope of our everyday life. But it is, again, very radical. And so this is where the perspectives that Rinpoche is presenting here, very much perspectives that we can apply to us, might not necessarily fit in with conversations that we might have with friends and so forth. The notion of the tender heart is nobody will disagree with that. But sometimes we have an unfortunate tendency to compartmentalize. So we have, on one hand, what we call the real issues of the world, and then we have the Dharma, or you could say our ideology or our ideals. And it's sometimes as if we compartmentalize. You know, we could sit comfortably and discuss Buddhist topics around, you know, in that time when we're studying Buddhism, but then we see, oh, then there's the real world out there, and that's where we think, well, you know, this probably the Buddhist teaching, not sure it could work here. And that's where we actually hear, yes, of course, it's good if we question that, but we should problematize this. I'd like to highlight this tension, or perhaps even lack of tension, because if we just leave things aside, there's something that the two don't connect. But if we analyze, and if we really use the 7 o'clock news as an inspiration for our path, which we very well could, then if we analyze, we will see that all the sort of man-made or human-made neurotic action, destructive action, and very often the actions that we discuss in terms of polarized politics, all comes back to insecure subjectivities, come back to individual camps, tribes, belief systems, discourses, and back to individuals that fuel this. And the fueling of this from individual side again comes back to fear, that again comes back to self. And at the end of the day, the issue that really is treated through the Dharma, which is the delusion that gives rise to self, that gives rise to the kleshas, that give rise to the patterns of action, karma, that which is identified as the cause of suffering, that is the very cause of suffering universally. So it's not as if we have Dharma on one hand and then we have the so-called real issues. Very often the discussions around real issues, they fail to touch on the real causes of the issues, and we really just end up talking about patchwork. you know, that the politicians should do better, that we as a humanity should, etc., etc. So the should is not going to happen unless the causes are there. And we can't blame others endlessly, because those others that we're blaming, they suffer from the same thing that we suffer. And so we're all patients in the same ward in some way. And that's also part of the reasons for Dzigar, that we have empathy, even with the craziest and the most destructive, you could say, parties in the world. So as such, then, here in this discussion that we're going to look at what's happening in the real world, and we're going to take this radical, you could say, reasoning that goes right really to the bottom of it. And of course, this lies perfectly in extension of everything else that we've talked about, because that delusional condition that centers around self, and which is self-centering, is dissolved on the basis of Dzigar, on the basis of what we call bodhicitta. So at the end of the day, we have a problem and we have a solution. We have the problem, which is the world that's fueled by kleshas and karma, and we have the solution, which is tenderness or bodhicitta. So as we then know, we live, all of us, with an awareness of a critical juncture in world history in terms of the outer environment and the imbalance and so forth, and also in terms of the discord among tribes and parties within the human realm. So how we presently, we could say, as a generation and also individually, our response is critical for the happiness of countless beings. So we could discuss this in a global context, in a larger context, and we can also discuss it in terms of our individual lives. So the point really, what's so empowering is that we can't blame anybody. We can't blame it on some external creator force. We can't just say that it's just bound to happen. We can see that whatever we do has an impact. And so what we do has an impact. We are part of the solution, especially if we have some notion of a vision and a path. So we can play part in the solution. And also, as far as if we wish to address these issues, there's no other way. So that, of course, means so many different, we could do so many different things. We could be active in politics. We could be active in terms of environmental actions and so forth. We could even do retreat. We could decide, I know really what would the best here is to do practice. But regardless of what we might do in terms of politics, activisms, or practice of the path, for this to be effective, we need our tender heart. And this is radical, because that very often we just talk in terms of behavior, what we're going to be doing. And probably if you're sitting in the company of many of our friends, and we're talking about all the crimes that are committed in the world on a sort of political scale, you probably won't find a lot of, it won't resonate with a lot of people if you just say, well, you just need to love everyone, it's just not going to fly. But at the end of the day, we can also see, as long as we're continuing whatever we're doing, and there's still a biased agenda, there's still us against them, then we're always going to have the cause of suffering present. And that's where bodhicitta, or tender heart, it's the only way. But this is something we, of course, need to reflect on, and also we need to be skillful in terms of presenting this idea. I would say that this present chapter that we have here, again, the world and the future, is an extraordinary, like I was saying, it's almost like a political manifesto, except it's not really politics as such, but it's a manifesto in terms of what we could do that lies ahead. So, Kongtrul says, all the imbalance and disharmony we're seeing has come from the opposite of Dzigar, a closed heart and a self-centered mind. If your intention is to promote balance and harmony among human beings, with animals, with trees, rivers, mountains, and the earth itself. You must put Dzigar at the center. You must make opening your heart your highest priority in life. From there, all positive outer results will naturally follow, as flowers naturally arise in the springtime. Whatever we choose to do, it needs to be founded on Dzigar. Without Dzigar, any attempt to benefit will be meaningless. If these attempts are driven by anti-Dzigar, it only adds to the suffering. This is where we could draw on some of the examples we have. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi comes to mind, where Mahatma Gandhi just simply refused to play the game, hard, what is it again, tough against tough or whatever. And really just on the basis of, you could say, insight, intelligence, certain degree of playfulness actually, and just a commitment to non-violence, respect of life. Dzigar essentially succeeded actually to operate on a sort of a larger scale in terms of politics, in terms of the Indian independence movement. Dzigar Kongtrul says, our future will depend on how much we put our trust in the goodness and effectiveness of Dzigar. It will depend on how much we make the most of our innate tenderness and how much we foster that tenderness in others. It will depend on how much we honor Dzigar for what it is, the source of all well-being, the ultimate wish-fulfilling jewel. And I don't think anybody would disagree with the greatest thing in the universe being love, being selfless, caring for others. But at the same time also, it's as if there's some understanding that, when in politics, it's not going to work. And of course, also what Dzigar Kongtrul will be mentioning, of course, this is very often where we should, if we have leader roles, that's where we need to generate this tenderness. And this is where also we will have an impact on others. So we might not necessarily be heads of government, but we do nevertheless have an impact on others in terms of our everyday life. And that's where we need to have this foundation of Dzigar in terms of just how we interact just with our immediate, those that are close to us. And we can see this has an impact. It has a vast impact. So all in all, the Dzigar is, like Rinpoche says, this is the ultimate wish-fulfilling jewel. Rinpoche says, Dzigar is the only thing that can give us the strength and resilience to overcome the challenges that the world presents. Even though we all have this tender heart, there is always certain individuals who, because of their intense confusion and their ability to influence people, spread pain and chaos to many others. But when people develop the strength of Dzigar, they act as buffers to protect others from such harm and influence. When many people collectively put their trust in the good heart, it is like erecting a wall that prevents the fire of confusion from spreading. So it would be good if we can do this, and we can also see in cultures where Dzigar has been part of the ethos and part of the outlook, part of the sort of almost national identity. If you go to Tibet sometimes, Tibetans will, say a little bit sort of, it's not brag, but then certainly talk about how they as Tibetans emphasize compassion. And it does actually, you can see within the lives of many Tibetans that went through hardships, how this actually has, one, really fostered their resilience, and also within their operating with others, have been enabled to, just achieve a lot. So this is where we can actually see examples of when this Dzigar, in terms of just, say, politics and secular action, how it actually translates into effective action. So Dzigar Kongtrul says, seen in this light, opening the heart is much more than just a spiritual practice. It is a way we can all embrace our relations with the world and with each other. It has social, economic, political, and environmental benefits. It is a way of navigating the world. It is a survival skill. So again, this is not just compartmentalized, but something that we could see. If it's there, it's what facilitates success. And if it's not, then we're really just looking at patchwork solutions. We're looking at just temporary solutions. So for things to work, we need Dzigar. And also for us to successfully make our way through the world, then we need this Dzigar. So this is something, and we could even say, and we could sort of wax slightly romantic and say, well, the old cultures had that. I mean, you will know that certainly in Western culture in the old days when you had religious education, as much as it was based on some, you could say, some belief systems that eventually were challenged. There was very much emphasis on this kindness and morality and the value of selflessness, warmth, and so forth. Of course, nowadays we tend to focus on how the past was very archaic and how there was a lot of negative aspects. And this is sort of a little bit to promote ourselves, and we like to think of ourselves that we're more progressive nowadays. But I personally actually see in a lot of those people who are older and my parents' generations and others and so on, how there was just instilled a sense of just respect and non-aggression that sometimes seems to have been lost in a sort of a wider societal context these days. So anyway, regardless, then certainly in terms of looking ahead, the world needs education and Dzigar. And this is not something that you'll find taught in schools and not something that you'll find at universities. It's something that is presently, we justifiably can talk about this as being radical. But it doesn't make it less true. And of course, us who are hearing this, hopefully with Rinpoche's inspiration, then this is something that will apply and it will have a ripple effect. Rinpoche makes the point in his book that we need to see the difference, the vast difference between open and closed hearts. And this is where we would want people with power and influence. They need hearts full of tenderness. And this is also, of course, applies to us because we do also have certain power. We do have certain influence. Rinpoche says what the world needs most is education and Dzigar. We need more people to learn how to look into their own hearts and see the vast difference in their well-being when their hearts are open and when they are closed. We need more people to see for themselves how Dzigar is the source of all happiness and goodness in the world. In particular, people in positions of power, influence, responsibility, such as people in government, the military, and law enforcement, need to fill their hearts with tenderness. Otherwise, they will likely enact their duties based on hunger for power, blind ideology, fear, or some other self-serving agenda. So we're not saying the government is bad. We're not saying the military is bad. We're not saying law enforcement is bad. We're not talking about action. We're not talking about the sort of stops that need to be in place in societies in terms of law enforcement, in terms of administration, etc., etc. We're not talking about action, but what we're talking about is what lies at the bottom of the hearts of those us who are fulfilling these roles. And this can be in part of democracies. This can mean we take to the streets, that we demonstrate. It means that we're proactive in terms of asserting rights and so on. That's fine. We should do that. But we will see we're always much more intelligent, much more effective, and create, again, ripples of, you say, meeting others in a non-aggressive way when we possess this condition of Dzigar. So that's why this is something that applies universally. Without that, then whatever we might be doing, and even if we might be apparently doing great things, if there's still this us against them mentality, if there's still lack of bodhicitta, then sooner or later the value of it will exhaust. So the Kongtrul just says, therefore my request to you is that you not only cultivate your own tenderness of heart, but that you promote sewa in the world. Please educate your children, your students, and others about sewa in whatever way, with whatever words, and to whatever degree you think it will be most effective. This is not an encouragement to spread Buddhist ideas. It is an encouragement to help people make the most of their own birthright, their most precious inheritance. So when we look at the world nowadays, like Rinpoche says, there's never been a time where there was so much interaction among various races and among different kind of political camps and so forth. And also we've never seen anything like modern societies, and the societies, by the way, is spelled S-O-C-I-E-T-I-E-S. Anyway, apologize for the typos. Fortunately, it seems that I probably could switch it on someone, but I don't actually have spell check. There's not actually a spell check in PowerPoint. I mean, there probably is, but for some reason it's in mine is not. So you see a fair amount of typos actually. Usually, spell check catches it. Anyway, that's beside the point. And the what we have with the various modern societies is this incredible wealth, never seen before. So there's conditions nowadays that are extraordinary in compared to what there used to be. So we have this situation also with tremendous wealth and also tremendous diversity. We, like, if I compare to my, if we compare to 100 years ago, we have friends that are Chinese, that are African, that are South American, that are European, Australian, etc., all across the globe. We take it for granted now, completely unthinkable, in 100 years ago. And then also the way that we identify in terms of gender, gays, and the various communities, then also political, religious beliefs, etc., etc. We have all this incredible diversity, and then some people would say it's just too much. It's we can't handle all these people that are so different, from us. And this is, of course, predictably, cause of conflict. There's some who would wish things just to go away or back to the way things were. Rinpoche says any attempts to impose a more segregated society will damage that society severely. On the other hand, this is not about ignoring the differences among people, the details that make every person unique. We're not talking about becoming colorblind and failing to notice what is in front of us. Variety is a part of what makes our world so rich. It is something to honor rather than a problem to solve. And this just rings a bell with, I'm a great admirer of a German sociologist called Ulrich Beck. And he actually made the point how the 20th century was so much about us discovering how we all are equal. And he said the 21st century will be so much about respecting our diversity. So the 20th century was about sort of identifying equality, and 21st century more about identifying variety, diversity. So the way forward lies in connecting more with a warm heart. We can see ourselves and all beings as a large extended family. So note here that there's a very, very positive note in what's being said here. We're identifying some challenges that are universal, but also we come back to this, and this is what we have in the Buddhist teaching again and again: bodhicitta, embracing all sentient beings. In this view, our diversity is an opportunity to open our heart more. Again, this is what we see in the Lojong teaching, that we have diverse opinions. Sometimes it's very difficult. People have different character. They have different style. We might find people annoying. And yet this is really an opportunity for us to open our heart more, not close them down. So there are many instances of warm-hearted global view of connection. So we can see how people everywhere try to do the right thing. We can see how we have organizations that ostensibly really are about caring for others. Organizations that, like Rinpoche mentions, Doctors Without Borders and the people that the Red Cross and other sort of organizations that are driven by a wish to help others. So, of course, we could go a bit cynical and identify possibly various interests that sometimes play in, but at the end of the day, most people actually really appreciate this sense of wishing to going out there and doing something for others. Rinpoche, he says, the world is full of good citizens, and that includes you. Look at yourself and all the good things you are doing to help others, to open your heart, to follow your innate desire, to make a difference in the world. What you are doing already, despite your current limitations, is beautiful. You must acknowledge all of this and let yourself be touched by the goodness that surrounds you. So we have good initiatives all around us. This is happening. In fact, most people, they wish to help others. We can see that. We might sometimes come across frustration and people sort of voice that, but at the end of the day, this is very much what people would like to do. And most people, they understand how the greatest joy lies in the giving, not necessarily in taking. Of course, sometimes we could identify, pointing the fingers to others, how they might be taking a lot and not giving a lot and so on. But if we sort of go beyond the sort of the stereotypification that we often have and actually people are touched in their true spot, then they know this. It is an understanding that exists not far under the surface in most of us. And also, most of us understand how harming others is not a good thing, how it brings suffering. There's very few who really would like to harm others. Sometimes out of ignorance, just not properly understanding how things are, or perhaps also just having confusing circumstances. But other than that, most people understand this. These kind of insights, they are, and Rinpoche's point here is, there's more of these than there is the ignorance about this. This wish to help others, the joy in giving, the joy in not harming, and so on. This insight, it prevails over confusion and the ensuing suffering. So the point is, there's a lot of it. Rinpoche says, those who inflict pain on others out of their confusion and ignorance are a small minority in this world's billion-plus people. If we lose perspective and overestimate their prevalence, then our aspiration will be hijacked by skepticism and negative thinking. There are those, especially in extreme religious groups and some portions of the media and politics, who attempt to serve their own agendas by promoting negative, polarizing thinking. There are others who have no agenda, but are habitually negative. But if our aim is to open our heart and let its natural, exuberant warmth spread to others, we must not let this kind of thinking infiltrate our mind. As I was reading this before I got to this, I just thought this, as much as we could talk about this sort of the positive, then sometimes people are overwhelmed by their fixation on the negative. And this is where Rinpoche's point here, this is so valuable, if you ask me, in terms of what I'm experiencing, very often encounter, is that in the way that we discuss things and in the common discourse and so on, we end up actually letting that kind of thinking, focusing on the half-empty glass, we let that infiltrate our mind way too much. And it sort of stifles us, it sort of limits us. So Rinpoche's point here, we must not let this kind of thinking infiltrate our mind. So yes, there are definitely negative persons out there, but there's a lot of really great people doing wonderful things. And perhaps we probably don't want to sit and, look like, goody two shoes, Annie Green Gables, in sort of sitting with our friends and just, gushing about how many wonderful things are happening in the world. It probably doesn't really amount to, you could say, good dinner music, but it's something that we, at least inwardly, should sustain in terms of our own, in terms of our own resilience and our own outlook. And we can, with skillfully share this with others at the right moment. Opening our hearts to others' suffering will not make us despondent. That's what we sometimes think. If we're too open to others, maybe we'll be overwhelmed by their suffering. This is not really the case. When we open our and really care about others, and we have that warmth that actually reaches others, not just about us, sort of as a gesture, a behaviorist gesture, in terms of I should hear others through and all of that, or hear them out. That maybe it's overwhelming, but we're more talking about this when we really care about others, and when there's someone we love and that's suffering. So we know what it's like to actually experience this warmth that aches for others, and it doesn't necessarily bring us down. It actually makes us want to go on, and it gives us, strangely enough, it gives us more strength. It doesn't make us despondent. We can do so day after day, year after year, life after life. This, of course, talking about the Bodhisattva lives in samsara joyfully, without bewilderment. So the Bodhisattva is not caught in samsara as such. The Bodhisattva is driven by caring, but yet also not sort of caught in just being wise and above it all, but very much just clear on being willing to fully embrace the world, but just not being confused about what's going on. So that's where this wisdom of the wisdom and compassion are inseparable. When there's genuine compassion, it's wise because it's not a compassion that has strings attached or expectations. And it's wisdom that is naturally endowed with compassion because it's wisdom that no longer is just entangled in self-serving attitude. There's no longer this need for falling back on making sure that we are okay. So basically, wisdom being selfless naturally entails compassion. And compassion also being selfless is a reflection of wisdom, genuine wisdom. So that's sort of the overall meta picture. But as far as our immediate reality goes, then, in terms of, or rather based on that, then it is continually that we have moments to cultivate this warmth. So we can do many different things. We can be active politically. We can be activists. We can do all sorts of philanthropy and work actively for others. And we can also do it in terms of shaping our attitudes and generating a mind of caring through prayers, aspirations, and so on. Dzigar Kongtrul says the ability to perform altruistic activities throughout the day, day in and day out, year after year, life after life, is what keeps the Bodhisattva feeling so light. It is what brings the perpetual smile to the face of His Holiness Dalai Lama and others like him. So if we wonder what makes the Bodhisattva tick, it is this continually warm heart that wishes to care for others. So these are then Dzigar Kongtrul's final words here, on the last page, where it says, the future of the world depends on Tsewa. This is fortunate, because Tsewa is something we are all born with. We all have a heart that can open, and we can feel the difference between an open heart and a closed heart. Out of habit or ignorance, we may choose to keep our heart closed, or we may not realize we have a choice. But when we begin to understand the power of Dzigar and how we can cultivate it, our innate wisdom will guide us toward greater and greater warmth and tenderness, until there is no difference between our heart and the heart of the Buddha, the perfect compassionate guide. We all have this infinite potential, and we will realize it sooner rather than later. Thanks to Dzigar, the wish-fulfilling jewel that you and I and all sentient beings possess, the future is in good hands. I was rather inspired by this, and there's nothing in here that we actually can disagree with, and there's nothing in here actually that, just would say, extends beyond the scope of what we can do. But it's a very, very powerful truth. This is the kind of thing that you could, we could write in stone, as sort of a manifesto of some sort. Anyway, let's see if there's somebody is willing to clean up the typos on the slides. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Deep thanks. Thank you for participating. This is being, you could say, you are being part of the solution by participating. Would you please send me the link to last week's recording? Actually, when you got the initial email, or when you signed up, there should have been a link. Anyway, of course, I'll send it to you, but just on an overall note, whatever course that we do, we always provide the link to the recordings. So you never, I mean, I'm very happy to email the links to you again, but you should always get them. Everything that we do in Siddhartha's Intent is always recorded, and you always have the link to the recordings. Anyway, yes, so I'm glad you could all join the study here, and I hope this will be something that stays with you. The truth of what's being said here is only too obvious, but it's very, very helpful to have it articulated and also reflected in various different ways, from different angles. So I don't think there's anything in this that's particularly difficult to understand, but you could say the way it's highlighted and treated in the various chapters of this book is remarkable, and really makes this an extraordinary gem, really, of a teaching. So I'm very happy that you would all join in this study. So I'm glad you like the slides. Thank you very much. Yeah. As far as the application of this goes, actually, this prayer that we do at the end, May Bodhicitta precious and sublime, that is actually directly about this, that we will want to act on it. Someone says, hope I can act on it, and with it more and more. That is exactly actually what's implicit in the prayer of Bodhicitta. And again, this is also so much what really is the theme of the way of the Bodhisattva. So we can say here we have sort of a contemporary introduction to the way of the Bodhisattva that knows, sort of presents exactly what is really the spirit of the way of the Bodhisattva, and so many of the, I mean, all really of the Mahayana pith instructions. Yeah, you're right. Actually, someone is saying the slides, they're not in the Dropbox. Okay. Well, now the slides might get fixed, but I'll put temporarily, until they're fixed, I'll put I'll put the slides up there. It all sounds so simple, but hard to do when the heart closes. We have to be aware and watch our mind. Yes, that's definitely true. And that's also a point that Rinpoche did in one of the chapters, really identified how it's essential that we're aware and watch our mind. But that being said, there's nothing really hard to do, except, yes, the tricky part is watching our mind. That is very much the issue, because the work itself is not actually that hard, but it does require that we're fully present in our mind and in our heart. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's also why Shantideva, he says, I really request you with folded hands to guard mindfulness. But remember, mindfulness has so much to do with the heart. So it's not just a sort of a spiritual advanced practice, but it's very much about continually coming back to what's real. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll conclude with a few aspirations, and then also I'll just let you know we're going to be doing a course again along the lines of what we're talking about here, the path of the Bodhisattva. And it's what's called the 37 practices of the Bodhisattva. It's a commentary by Dinghu Chinsa Rinpoche. It's called The Heart of Compassion. That'll be the next course that we'll be doing here. Anyway, we'll just do some aspirations. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachings. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. So yes, the next course then will be the Heart of Compassion. So this will be from the 6th of May to the 10th of June, and Thursdays, 7:30. Usually we say, you'll probably even on the website, probably for this course, it probably says 7:30 to 8:30, but as many of you will know, it usually goes on till about 9. Anyway, this is from a great master in Tibet called Ngulchu Togme, a great bodhisattva, and this teaching is one of the great classics of the Mahayana in Tibet, and this will be then with Khyentse Rinpoche's commentary. Okay, hope to see you there. If not, anyway, thank you for joining this present study, and all the very best for your practice. Take care. Ooh.